Okay, welcome everybody to Dakota Garden Expo. And next what we're going to have is a presentation about incorporating conservation practices in your garden. And our speaker is Jaden Russell. Jaden is the Agriculture and Natural Resource Agent in Morton County. And he's native to North Dakota, and he's been with the extension since 2024. So Jaden, welcome to the Expo.
Thank you.
Right.
All right, yeah, like you said, Jaden Russell, it's exciting to be here. I got asked to be here from Kelsey, and I didn't know what to talk about because I wouldn't consider myself a gardener, but I figured, well, conservation practices might be the best route to go. So the goal with this is to have conversations and talk about it, because I can sit here and talk about cover crops and no-till. I can talk about each category or topic for hours, right? It's never ending, and I can cite all this data and all these resources, but I'm going to go kind of on the outskirts of everything and talk about different things and how they can help your garden. And if you want more information on it, we can have those conversations afterwards as well. Part of my background, I worked for the Natural Resources Conservation Service for 3 years as a soil conservationist, so a lot of my experience with conservation is on the farming side. Down in Nebraska, it was corn soybean rotations, and that was about it. So the variety isn't nearly as great as it should be, but when I talk about these conservation practices, I don't think that it matters if it's a large-scale farm or if it's a small home garden. I think they all work very similar. And like he said, I started with NDSU Extension on June 3rd of last year. So conservation. Why conservation? What's the definition of conservation? Just a rough idea. I did a Google search. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, it's the prevention of wasteful use of a resource. That's Google search, that's what conservation is, right? So part of not wasting resources, we're trying to get the most bang for our buck when we're using nutrients, fertilizers, our soil, and our water, right? Now, in return, we're also improving everything as time goes on by limiting the amount of waste we have. So why conservation? We're going to improve our soil health. We're going to improve our water quality and our water quantity as well. And in return, our plant health and production is going to improve as well. And then we're going to limit the amount of excess chemicals that we apply to our gardens, if we are applying any at all. So when I think of conservation and I think of if I'm meeting my marks, right, and using conservation practices, I look at the soil health principles. And the first one is soil armor, keeping the soil covered. Minimizing disturbance, so that's your no-till or minimum tillage. Plant diversity, crop rotations, cover crops, and with that crop rotation, changing the location of where you're planting in your garden. Continual live plant roots. I know in North Dakota it's hard to have a growing plant all the way through the season, all the way through the year. But that's where like cover crops come into play, because you can have a winter rye or something that's going to go dormant in the fall and then continue growing in the spring to get that maximized effect of live plant roots in the soil. And then livestock integration. Now I know for gardens that's not really possible, right? But trying to integrate livestock, especially if you're on a farm or you're in a rural area where you can try to get sheep or goats or something in there in the spring. Let's say you do plant cover crops. That's a great way to terminate your cover crops out and get ready for the growing season in May when you're planting your plants in your garden. So I would say for home gardens, 4 out of those 5, if you're hitting each one of those, then you're doing pretty well, right? So the top picture is a farm, right? And the bottom picture is a garden. So what's the difference between these two? This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with farm ground versus gardens and conservation. And in my mind, there's no difference to it other than what you call it, the size, the time spent, and the money spent, right? So when I talk about these, like I said, I don't have a huge gardening background. So when I talk about cover crops and no-till and all of this stuff, it might sound like I'm coming from that farming background, but it all works the same in your home garden. So how are we going to start? First, we have to identify our needs, right? So whenever I talk to producers that are having issues with plant health or soil health or anything like that, I always talk to them about getting soil tests. So how many of you guys test your soil in your gardens? Actually send them in, you do? Awesome. Yeah, so I talk to a lot of people that don't test their soils because they think that's more of a large-scale operation thing. And it's kind of interesting where NDSU's soil testing facility recently shut down, but I've been sending a lot of them to Ward Labs in Nebraska or AgVice up by Grand Forks. And you can do a routine soil test for $25, $30. And it's going to give you pH, organic matter, and then the current nutrients that are in the soil as well. And we'll get more into the soil sampling here in a little bit. And then water tests. Water is one of those constants that you're going to have every single year that is really difficult to change. So understanding what the pH is, and then your current minerals and nutrients. So if you're using well water, I know a lot of well water around Morton County has a lot of iron in it, same thing around here too. And rural water, what do they put in their rural water when they treat it? Or city water, same thing, right? So understanding where you're at in those two worlds is going to be key to knowing what you need to do in the conservation world moving forward. And so like I said, water and soil tests you can send to Ward Labs in Kearney, Nebraska, or AgVice near Grand Forks. This is a soil testing form from Ward Labs. It makes it pretty simple. One of the handouts I gave you is kind of a step-by-step process on how to conduct soil sampling. So if you have questions on that after this, I'm more than happy to talk to you as well. But I'd say the number one thing when it comes to soil sampling that a lot of times gets missed or homeowners kind of struggle with is making sure that you label them correctly. Because when you get your result in, and I'll show you a result here in a little bit, but when you get your result in, it's going to have the sample ID on there, and then you got to know where you took that sample from, right? So you know how to address that soil in the future. And then this is a water sample submittal form for Ward Labs. So it is pretty simple. If you do need any help with it or you're looking at doing it, give us a call and we're more than happy to help. So I'm going to exit out of this and show you kind of what a soil, I want to touch on the soil sampling thing because it is new to some. So this is from NDSU, but they all look very similar. So the nice thing about when you send in a soil test is you can tell them what you're going to be planting there. And then you get your soil analysis back and it says you have this much nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, your pH is here, whatever it might be. And then it'll tell you. And Ward Labs does a pretty good job of this as well. I haven't seen anything from AgVice, but Ward does a pretty good job with fertilizer recommendations. So it takes a lot of load off your back when you're trying to figure out how much do I need to fertilize this area if I'm growing tomatoes here or whatever it might be. So it's just kind of a neat little thing that for $25 or $30, it can save you a lot of time and a lot of hassle. And that's going to improve your efficiency when you're applying your nutrients to your garden as well. Oh boy, I'm lost here. All right, so we'll dive a little bit more into different practices now that you can use in your garden for conservation. So the first one we're going to talk about is cover crops, and then we'll talk about no-till, some nutrient application, crop rotation, and then we'll dive into irrigation water management a little bit as well. So cover crops, another handout that I gave you all it's a publication from NDSU showing or trying to help you identify which cover crop you should use. Because there's multiple different kinds for multiple different goals or issues that you're having. So once you get your soil test back, identify your issue or your goal so that you can choose the right cover crop for you. And another thing with cover crops is you have to be patient. That's probably the golden rule when it comes to anything conservation, is you have to be patient, because after year 3 or year 4, that's when you're going to start seeing a lot of the good that comes out of it. Your first couple years, you're probably not going to notice much of a difference. And some things that cover crops will do is they'll add to or take away certain nutrients from the soil. So if you're high in nitrogen, you can plant a specific cover crop to help scavenge some of that nitrogen out of your soil so you're not burning your plants up the following year. And then they can add to it as well. You can plant a legume that fixes its own nitrogen to provide a little bit more nitrogen back into the soil. They'll help provide more water retention. So winter rye is a good example, right? It helps lock in a lot of that snow from the winter, and then it keeps it there while it melts and soaks into the soil. So you have good soil moisture going into planting season in May or early June. They're also going to help break up your compaction layers as well. And we'll talk more about compaction when we hit on no-till or minimum tillage. So our next one is no-till or minimum tillage. This is another great way to solve your compaction issues. So a lot of times when people use rototillers or rakes and hoes and stuff like that, they think that they're breaking up the compaction. And you are at the surface, right? But let's say your compaction layer is 3 inches below the surface and you're using a rototiller to break up the ground and make a nice smooth seed bed for planting. What ends up happening is that compaction layer just keeps getting pushed down lower and lower. And an easy way to tell if you have a compaction issue or not is using a wire flag and hold it between your index and thumb and just stick it in the ground. You don't have to apply a lot of pressure, but as soon as you hit resistance and your fingers start slipping, then you can grab it at the base and figure out where your compaction layer is. And the reason we worry about these is because of plant roots, right? When plant roots, when they hit that compaction layer, sometimes they'll penetrate through or they'll try to get through that. But what ends up happening is they end up growing sideways. And then now they're competing with other plants in the same area rather than going straight down through the soil. So if you have a compaction layer at 3 inches, maybe you could look at implementing a turnip or a radish or even growing onions during the growing season in that area, because that's going to help break up that compaction layer. And then the following year, you can rotate that out, and then you're going to have more soil aggregation, and your infiltration rate's going to be better, and all of that as well.
If you're like spading your garden with like a potato rate where you're going down almost 12 inches, is that something that we concern about, that your compaction layer is that deep?
You know, looking at compaction in a garden is a little bit different. So obviously when you're growing things like potatoes and you're harvesting them, it's hard to have a no-till system, right? And trying to limit the amount of pressure and breakup on the soil, trying to minimize that as much as possible is the goal. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get away with it 100%. The thing with that is, with spades or any of that, you're not really creating a compaction layer, but what you're doing is you're breaking that soil apart, making it more susceptible for runoff and erosion, and that's kind of more of a concern there. But it's, like I said, it's hard to get away from it 100%. And that's kind of like with weed control too, right? A lot of people might use rototillers for weed control, or they're using rakes or hoes or whatever like that. And compaction isn't a huge concern there. It's just the making that soil loose makes it easier for erosion. And I'll touch on soil infiltration a little bit as well. So that other handout is from the NRCS, and it goes step by step to figure out your soil infiltration rate. And we'll talk a little bit more about it with irrigation water management as well. But that's another thing that no-till will help with breaking up the compaction and forming the soil aggregates is making that infiltration rate normal for that soil. Because if you have that compaction layer, you have a lot of runoff, the water isn't going to soak into the soil nearly as quick and nearly as efficient. Okay, nutrient application. So spoon feed fertilizers. This is kind of an interesting concept that is gaining a lot of traction down in Nebraska. And there was a producer that he was all corn, soybeans, and he would apply like 200 pounds of nitrogen an acre on corn in Nebraska is not unheard of. And that's a ridiculous amount, right? And he started looking at it and he tested his soil, tested his water, realized that he had credits there in the soil that he could use for nitrogen. He also had credits in his water that he could use for nitrogen as well. So then they used drones with infrared imagery and he took a spoon-fed approach. So he's only feeding nitrogen to the plants when they need it rather than all up front. And it was 205 or 210 pounds an acre of nitrogen. He went 1 year implementing that conservation practice with his nutrient management, and he cut it down to about 100 pounds an acre, and he had the same yield. And so he realized that I'm applying 110 pounds more an acre of nitrogen. Where is all of that going? Right? So that's where we talk about the wastefulness too. And what ends up happening is it all ends up back into the groundwater, which then is in our drinking water, and it creates a big problem. And so it's a huge education piece showing that you can grow a really good crop if you just look at your soils and your water and then combine that together before you do your fertilization, and you're going to be way more efficient with your applications. So yeah, understanding where your water and soil is at, and then trying to use those organic nutrients such as compost or manure as well. Okay, for crop rotation. So the easiest way to explain crop rotation is if you're planting your tomatoes in one spot every single year, what ends up happening is that soil in that one area becomes depleted in certain nutrients that the tomato plants need. And by rotating it around, you're using the most out of your soil because something like tomatoes is going to use something different than maybe peppers or onions or something different. Another thing about it too is it's going to help limit invading pests. And it's the same thing in the crop world. That's why they implement these crop rotations, because pests, insects, or diseases use that species or that plant to reproduce. And if you break that up and not plant it the same way twice in a row, that halts their reproductive process, making it harder for them to come back into that area the next year. So it's just like potatoes, right? What tends to come with potatoes? The grubs, right? So if you swap that up and plant the potatoes somewhere else, that's going to help slow that reproductive cycle of those pests that are eating out your potatoes. And part of the crop rotation is cover crops are typically used in the off season, right? But you can implement cover crops as part of your rotation as well, especially if you have a really bad compaction problem. Maybe you just take a year off in quadrants of your garden and rotate cover crops through that just to get a large root base down into the soil and to try to break up that compaction a little bit. So using onions or radishes that you can still harvest and use in salsa or whatever it is, but you're helping break up that ground a little bit. So irrigation water management. So drip irrigation or soaker hoses. I don't know if any of you use these or not, but they're a very efficient way and they make it super easy. You can throw it on a timer and you have different size emitters that you can use so that you can water each plant independently almost, and you're not wasting a bunch of water unless that's what works, but using a sprinkler or something like that. And also measuring your sprinkler systems. So turn it on for 10 minutes and put a rain gauge out there so you know, hey, I'm putting 10 hundredths on in 10 minutes or whatever. So you can accurately judge how much water you're putting on each time. And conduct a soil infiltration test by using that that handout that I gave you. That gives you an idea on, are you watering it too fast, or are you not watering it fast enough? Kind of what's happening to that water when it hits the soil. And that's going to tell you the amount of runoff that you're probably going to have as well. And testing your soil moisture during the growing season. I know last year, I didn't call myself a gardener. I do have a raised bed at home that ends up getting overtaken with weeds every summer because I would rather go golfing than pull weeds. But kind of interesting is I would water it, and then I would go out there and without looking into the soil that much, right? You look at just the surface, you might think you need to water it again. But it's kind of amazing what happens if you take a little spade or a little shovel and you dig in 3 inches. I mean, it can make a world of difference, right? And that'll determine whether you need to water or not. So just keeping an eye on those things. And then using rain barrels for a cleaner water source. If we don't get much rain, it makes it hard to use a rain barrel. But the nice thing about using those is it's a perfect way to treat your water before you apply it to your garden. And even if you have barrels that you're filling with well water or whatever, so that you can adjust the pH a little bit, or you can maybe add some minerals or nutrients. If you're using a drip system, however, be cautious of what's in the water and making sure you also run it through a filter before you use those drip systems, just so that they don't plug the emitters. Okay, so some other tips. Kitchen waste for compost. I think there's going to be more people that are much better experts in the world of compost than I am. So I will leave that to them. But recycle as much as you can. So you can use cover crop waste at the end of the year when you terminate it, or you cut it, or you burn it off with a torch, or whatever it might be. Whatever waste you have, you can reuse that and put that back on your soil for a weed barrier or mulch. And then using companion planting. So this is something I know nothing about, is companion planting, but I know that it works. Planting certain plants next to each other to minimize the amount of pests that come near. There's certain ones that can avoid others. And along with that, planting pollinators and things like that to help bring some other things into your garden will help as well. So I know I talked quite a bit, and I kind of rambled on, and I didn't leave much room for questions or comments or concerns, and there's some other people in this room that might know more about this subject than I do, and so I'd like to open it up for more conversation or questions, or maybe some things that I missed or you'd like me to elaborate more on.
You said NDSU does not do the soil testing anymore?
They do not do the soil testing anymore, no. They closed down last fall. They closed their doors. It was mainly a manpower issue. They didn't have enough help is the reason behind that.
Do you guys still carry the bags and tests so people know where to send them off?
Yes, yep. So at least in my office we do, yes. I can't say that for every extension office, but we do have soil sample bags, and then I have sheets printed off from AgVice and Ward Labs depending on where they want to send them to.
If you want to use a cover crop or would be interested in trying a cover crop, you don't take the tomatoes off until October, the carrots out till November. Is there any cover crop that you can use in that time?
Yeah, so
For those time frames?
yeah, so for carrots it makes it a little tough, but with tomatoes there's nothing stopping you from planting it before you harvest and letting them grow before you harvest. A lot of producers have started doing that with corn. Is they'll aerial seed their cover crops into the field before harvest, and then they can harvest right into it, and it'll start growing pretty quick. So for carrots, that's a really good question. I'm not 100%, but you could still grow things around it in the meantime before harvest. So for those of you who have done some conservation practices already, what are things that you guys have implemented and that have worked for you?
I don't till my raised beds and I barely get weeds.
Yeah, yeah. How long of you doing no-till before you notice that there's no weeds?
I put them in about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'd say maybe a couple years ago is when I kind of
Yeah.
stopped.
That's typically 2 or 3 years, you can start to see an improvement. Yeah, exactly. That's why it's important to be patient, because it's easy to start something and then it's a lot of work, but then, you know, in 3 years it's not too terrible, and then you start seeing the benefits. So, what else?
Thick layer of wood chips over everything.
Yeah, keeping it covered and protecting that soil from the top. Yeah, absolutely. So those of you who haven't started implementing them, what are some issues you're having in your gardens, and then maybe I can help identify some different things that you could do to help with that.
Everyone here has perfect gardens up here.
I know. I mean, compaction is one of those things a lot of people don't think about, and they don't dig too deep in, right? Because you can grow a plant if you work hard enough just about anywhere, and it's one of those that once you break that layer up, you'll notice a pretty dramatic difference in your plant's health and production if you can do that. And that's something that unless you look into it, you're not going to know. You're not going to really think about it too much. So.
If you use like radishes or turnips, things that are in the ground as your cover crop, do you leave that in over the winter, and then in the spring when you're ready to, like you want to plant again, are they gone? Are they broken down?
So they're still going to be there. I know my experience using turnips or radishes as a cover crop, typically they're grazed as a termination method, because livestock absolutely love those things, and so they'll rip them out of the ground and eat them. But you know, whether you pull them or you leave them in, that it would depend on what you're planning on planting there probably. But I mean, I'm just thinking on when we've planted them before, and typically they grow more in the spring after they're seeded, and then they just, like I said, they terminate them with livestock and then plant right into them after that. So.
Did wildlife like deer and stuff? You have a lot of deer, they do like the field radishes and stuff like that. So you run the risk that if you're in an area with deer, that they're going to be attracted to the garden.
Oh, okay. That's where that companion planting comes in, so you can put things that they don't like to keep them out of those patches.
Yes.
Well, I've heard that if you use kitchen waste, that it attracts like voles and other.
Yeah, like I said, I've never composted before. I've never really done that. So I know using kitchen waste is a common thing that a lot of people do. I don't know if there is also a problem with attracting other varmints like that too. I suppose it would depend on how it's broken down. If you have a separate compost pile and you break that stuff down off to the side and then use it once it's mixed, then it would probably be less of an issue. And that's another important part with adding your nutrients to your soil. If you're using something like compost or manure, you can get that tested as well at AgVice and at Ward Labs. So you know how much nitrogen, for example, for manure that you're putting on. Because sometimes it can be really, really high, a lot higher than you might think. Yeah.
Okay, so this might be a little bit of a deep dive, but in our high tunnel where I work, we have raised beds that are connected to the ground and some that aren't. Mm-hmm. And we utilize all 5 soil health principles across every single bed.
Yeah.
The ones, when we're looking at our soil tests, the ones that are not connected to the ground are average between 8 and 11% soil organic matter. The ones that are connected to the ground average 3 to 5.
Okay.
And I'm wondering why.
So the ones that are connected to the ground have a lower organic matter.
Yes.
So my thought with that would be the ones that aren't connected to the ground, the roots, everything is contained within that smaller area, whereas the ones connected to the ground they're diving deeper in.
Yes.
But maybe, I don't know though. I mean, at the surface,
Well, and they get, okay, I'll bring it one step further. The
Yeah.
ones that are on the ground are on top of a fatty clay layer.
okay, so they're not really penetrating that anyway.
Not really penetrating that. We do have a couple holes dug through them, backfilled with gravel, so we can get water drainage.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think the roots would really be penetrating that much.
And it's the same crop, same everything.
Similar crop, same management.
That's interesting. I don't have an answer for you. Anything else? Do you want me to go more in depth on anything?
Ones that are off the ground, are they like in a box raised off the ground?
Yep.
Is it plastic or something that would hold?
Just wood.
Well, that went a little quicker than I think I started talking pretty fast. But here's my contact info. If you have any questions, concerns, if you'd love to have a conversation about anything in the conservation world, please give me a call, shoot me an email. The back table out there, I have more of these handouts and then some cards as well with my contact info on them. So hopefully you learned something and have a good rest of the expo.
Thank you, Jaden.